There's a piece of movie history sitting right here. And for over 40 years, almost no one knew it still existed. It wasn't in a studio archive. It wasn't in a museum.
It belongs in a museum.
And it has certainly never been seen in a high-end auction. It was sitting in someone's house in Southern California until I found it on Facebook Marketplace. And what makes this item truly remarkable is that it may represent the first time audiences ever saw a legendary movie logo. Today I'm telling the story of how I casually discovered what is likely a one-of-one surviving piece of filmmaking history. I'm not going to show it yet, because to understand why this matters, you need to understand where it came from. So a few days ago, I was scrolling Facebook Marketplace, which, let's be honest here, it's usually a disaster. Don't get me started on my history with Facebook Marketplace. But then I noticed a listing from a man in Upland, California, who was selling his house and preparing for a move. The photos made my jaw hit the floor. If what he was selling was what I thought it was, I knew I had to see it immediately. The seller explained he was a graphic design student at Cal State San Bernardino in the early 1990s. One of his professors was George McGinnis. Now, if you Google George McGinnis, you're likely to find a legendary basketball player or maybe even a former Disney Imagineer, neither of whom are responsible for what I'm about to show you. This George McGinnis was a partner at the Image Factory in New York, one of the premier graphic design and animation houses in the 1980s. I was told George and his wife moved from New York after he accepted a teaching position at Cal State San Bernardino. One day, as a student, the seller noticed several illustration boards stacked on top of a filing cabinet in the corner of McGinnis's office. He asked about this one in particular, and George simply told him he could have it. No fanfare, no paperwork, just a working piece from a finished film project. That student safeguarded this item for over 35 years until the day I drove out to acquire it. All right, I think it's time. You want to know what this is? I know you do. Let's do it. This is an original 1983 design mechanical for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. It's what is known as a primary design master used to produce the film's logo on a variety of marketing materials before the film's release in 1984. This is camera-ready artwork. In the early 80s, there was no Photoshop. If you wanted a logo to appear in a movie trailer, you had to build it physically. This is mounted illustration board, hand-spaced typography, and a clear acetate overlay. Every piece of text you see was cut out and glued down by hand at the Image Factory. So how and where was this used? Well, since Image Factory specialized in animation, this board was likely the source for the title cards in the first two Temple of Doom trailers. If you've ever seen the first Temple of Doom teaser, it's one of my personal favorites in all of indie media, coming off the success of Raiders, announcing the return of the big three, Spielberg, Lucas, and Ford. It has that iconic 80s voiceover guy.
For the summer of '84.
The logo at the end appears with a cracked stone texture. That effect certainly wasn't painted on. I don't see it. Instead, they would film this board clean as a beauty pass, then using an optical printer, they would sandwich that film with another layer of cracked stone or plaster. The cracks only existed in the final photographed composite, which means this physical board was the DNA, the foundational layer for the very first moving images audiences ever saw of this title. One of my favorite things about it, and something I already knew as a longtime Indiana Jones fan, humble brag, the I in Indiana here is a straight vertical letter. Before this piece surfaced, I was already aware that the Indiana Jones logo originally used a simpler eye before it was redesigned into the flared seraphy eye that has firmly taken its place in the pop culture zeitgeist. By the time Temple of Doom hit theaters in May of '84, the typeface was permanently changed. However, this straight-edged logo came first, and because this board features the straight eye, it can also be referred to as a transitional design master, created during the narrow window when Lucasfilm was still refining the brand. This item is essentially a snapshot of the franchise's visual history mid-evolution. That's pretty cool. Production mechanicals weren't collectibles, they were tools. Studios usually discarded them once they had served their purpose. Most were destroyed, lost, or simply thrown away. Can you imagine? Which means surviving examples, especially ones tied to a major franchise like Indiana Jones, are extraordinarily rare. For all practical purposes, this is a true one-of-one artifact. All right, I'm going to be real for a second here. As a lifelong Indiana Jones fan, owning something like this feels pretty surreal. This isn't just connected to a movie I love. This is part of the process that introduced it to the world. Someone built this by hand in 1983, never imagining that decades later it would still exist, or that someone like me would be sitting here and telling its story. For now, I'm just the caretaker of a small piece of cinematic history. Honestly, though, that's an incredible feeling.